Have you always wanted to be the mayor of your own little town? Well, today you have the chance. In Tiny Towns from Alderac Games. This is a cute little game where you are the mayor of your own little town. We get these little boards here, and on these boards we are going to construct little buildings by using different resources and place them out on our board. That is the way we will build up our little town. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up this pretty little game, but also what you can or cannot do in the gameplay. So once you have watched this video, well, you are ready to build your own little town. So this here is the setup of the game. Each player gets a player board, looking like this. This is where the players will place out their resources to later place out buildings. The first player is whoever have constructed something lately in real life, and will get this little hammer, which is the first player token. We then need to put out the cottage card with the little house symbol on the back faced up on the table. Then we need to take the rest of the building cards and divide them into their different categories. We shuffle each category separate and place one of the buildings faced up on the table. If this is your first game, we recommend to start with the farm, well, chapel, tavern, theater, and the factory. The rest of the cards goes back into the box. Now we need to place out all the buildings, but also the resources for easy reach for all players. Then each player will get 2 monument cards face down in front of them. They should look at these cards and choose one to keep. Then each player also gets a little monument. Each player can only build 1 monument during their gameplay. If this is your first game, you might want to skip the monuments, because they make the game just a little bit harder. Next to the table we also have the score sheet, which will be used in the end of the game for scoring. And now we're ready to start playing. In Tiny Towns, you are a little critter. You have found the perfect place to build your village, far away from any other dangerous animals that might want to eat you. You are the mayor of your tiny town, building and constructing your town from the ground up. You will do this by place out these little research cubes on your board. When you have a pattern matching one of the buildings, well, then you can build that building. Depending on how you place the buildings in your town, they will score differently, and each building scores in different ways. Some of these buildings will need other buildings to actually score at all. The little cottage here, for example, will need some kind of food production to actually score. So you can't just place out buildings any way you like to, you have to have some strategy. A turn is played out with the master building starting their turn, announcing which resource they would like to put out on the board. And then all players take their resource and put it out simultaneously. Then the turn goes on to the player on the left. But let's take a little closer look on what you can actually do during your turn. But before we take a look at what a player can do, we need to take a look at the cards. And what do they actually mean? Well, up here you have the name of the building you would like to build. Up here you have what kind of building type this building is. In this case, this is a factory. Down here you have the pattern that you need to build in your town to be able to place a factory. And lastly, down here you will have a text stating that this building will give you some type of ability, either during the gameplay or in the end of game scoring. So the turns will start by the master builder, the one with the hammer, announcing which resource they would like to put out on the board. For example, wheat. Then the master builder, but also the other players, take up that resource simultaneously. And then they place it out somewhere on the board, where they feel like it's logical for them to place it. But what are the different resources, and how can you actually place them? In this game there are 5 different resources. We have wood, wheat, brick, glass, and stone. And you can pretty much place them out any way you would like to on this board. But as I told you, it is good to have some strategy when you start to place them out. and maybe have a look at the different buildings that are available to build, and already now start to have a plan on what you would like to build. When the master builder have announced which resource they would like to place out, all players need to take that resource, wood for example, and place it out somewhere on their board. But there are, however, some rules on what you can do with this resource from now on. Because once you have placed it, you may not move it to another square. And you can only remove this resource from the board when you use that resource to build a building. Only one resource may be placed per square. When a resource is removed from the board because you're going to build a building, the resource goes back to the main supply. So that was the two first steps. First, the master builder announced which resource we should pick. Then each player, step 2, places out that resource on the board. Step 3 is where you are now allowed to build a building. Again, this happens simultaneously. So if you have a pattern that matches up with any of the buildings that we have out on the board, we can now build that building. But you do not have to build it now. You can wait. So if you have 3 possible builds, well, you can build them all later instead. But if you would like to build a building now, you need to announce that you are building a building and what building you are building to the other players. So here, for example, the master builder have a pattern corresponding with the theater, meaning that they can place out their building. But how do you do that? So in this case here, the master builder have managed to get 4 resources matching the pattern of the theater, meaning that they can now remove these resources to place out the little theater on their board. But you do not have to have the exact same pattern as this one. It could be twisted or turned any way you would like to, and you would still be able to build this building. But the pattern itself must match the pattern on the card, meaning that it could be mirrored, it could be twisted and turned, but it could not shift places on the colors themselves. Once you have decided to build a building, you also need to decide where on your board you would like to place that building, because you can place it on any of the spots where you have a matching resource. So we remove the resources, and then we can put out the building here, 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 or over here. I want it there. And remember that the placement on the buildings can be important, because some of the end of game scoring are only valid if certain buildings are next to them. And that's the way you can place your resources out on your player board. It's not that complicated, right? But the hard thing here is to place it out in a way so you actually can place buildings, but also in a way that you place the buildings the way and in the placement that you would like to. And it's not that easy as it looks like. It takes some strategy. So if this is your first game, there is a beginner rule called the Cavern Rules. This is a rule that lets a player place up to 2 resources during one game next to the board instead, just to make it a little bit more easier. But once the players have done these 3 steps during their round, meaning announcing which resource, placing out the resource, and if they like to build any buildings, we go into a new round, meaning that the master builder gives this little hammer to the player on the left. But this master builder cannot start their round before everyone else is done with their placement of resources and buildings. So before this master builder announces what resource they would like to place out, they need to take a look around the table just to make sure that everyone else are done. Once they are done, they can start their round by announcing the new resource. Then everyone again simultaneously takes up a resource, places it out, and then place buildings. So if you have filled your land with buildings and cannot or do not want to place any more buildings, well, then you can say that, well, I am done, and you can start to calculate your scores. And now you are not a part of the rounds anymore, but the other players that may not have filled their board yet, they can continue playing. And you can actually keep on playing even if you cannot place out any more buildings. So even if your board is filled and you still feel like you want to try, well, you can keep on going until you just simply can't place anymore. Even if you are the last player left and everyone else have already started to calculate their points, you can keep on going until you can't do anything else. But when you feel like you are done with your little town here, it is time for you to calculate points. But how do you score? Well, it's all depending on which buildings you have in your town. If they're fed, if they're unfed, and how they are placed. And it's also depending on which building you have been able to build during this game, because all of the buildings are not in every game. But if we take this example here, you would get 1 point for each adjacent well to a cottage. And it doesn't matter if the cottage is fed or unfed. As long as they are adjacent, you will get 1 score per well adjacent. And you will get 3 scores for each fed cottage. One of these farms, the red buildings, will feed 4 cottages in your town. Meaning that this time you have managed to feed all of your cottages and get 3 times 4 points. If you have managed to build a chapel, you will get 1 point for each of the 4 fed cottages and 0 for 1 unfed cottage. If you have managed to build 3 taverns, you would get 9 scores. If you managed to build a bakery next to a farm, you would have scored 3 points. This one here is sadly not adjacent and will not score. The warehouse, however, will score you minus if it would have held any resources. Because when you place a warehouse, you place resources next to that warehouse. And when another player names this resource, you may place a different resource instead. This time we have managed to empty out our warehouse, so we do not get any penalties. But if this resource would have been placed on the warehouse, we would get -1. We also get minus for every empty square we have in our town. And this is why it's a good idea to keep on filling your town with resources even if you cannot place buildings. And that's how you play tiny towns. You have a master builder announcing which resource to place out. We do this simultaneously. Once we have a pattern matching any of the buildings, we can build that house. Again, we do this simultaneously. Once we have done our round, the little hammer goes to the player on the left and a new round starts. When we feel like we are done with our buildings and we have constructed what we want to construct, well then we simply step out of the game and start to count our scores. Once everyone have finished their buildings and counted their scores, well then we have a winner. So this game is what I would like to call a comfort game. It's easy set up, it's fast to play, it's fast to learn, and it still gives you a little bit of challenge when you play it. I really enjoyed this game. It's got nice artworks and it works well for a lot of players. Even with the kids here, I mean, I have small kids that are 5 and 8 years old, and what I did is that I set up little teams with them where I played with my little daughter and helped her out. My son could actually figure out this all by himself. I mean, he needed some help with the cards and how to think with the placement of the buildings, but once we had gone a couple of rounds, well, the game really flowed. But also with more experienced players, this game works quite well. Because you have the beginner cards here, that makes it a little bit easier for new players in a start, but then you can use harder and harder cards to build up the levels and difficulties in this game, which makes this a pretty broad game for the most player groups. It does not take that long time to set up, it does not take long time to learn, and it is a smooth gameplay where the game itself does not take that long time to play. So this here I could recommend definitely for families, but also more advanced player groups. In this game you also have a solo mode. Here you use these resource cards instead. You shuffle the resource cards and then you create a little draw pile. Then you would show 3 of these cards face up and then you draw these resources as normal. Once you are done, these cards are discarded at the bottom of the pile, and that's the way you keep on playing until you feel like you are done with your little town, and simply measure the scores against yourself. If you manage to beat yourself, well, happy days, and if you do not, well then you might need to go back and take some building lessons. The artwork in this game is quite cute, quite nice, there's a lot of color, it's a light game, it's really family friendly. You have the cool little nice artworks here on the cards that are little pretty pictures of just critters' lives going on, which I quite enjoy. I mean, this is a nice, happy little game. There you have it, my friends. That was Tiny Towns from Alderac Games, designed by Peter McPherson. A pretty cool little game. Light, beautiful artwork, fit most group, easy to learn, hard to master. This is a quite little nice game. And I like the feel of the box, I like the feel of the art. I quite like this game. If you want to know more about it, well, check out the links down in the descriptions and you will find web pages to this game. If you like my video, well, you know what to do. Please comment, give me a little thumbs up there, subscribe to the channel, or whatever you feel like doing. But most important, do not forget to keep on spreading that board gaming love I know you all have. Peace.